Welcome back to Tazeen TV. Now, today I am honoured and deeply blessed and fully grateful to be joined by Naseem Khakoo. Naseem, for those unfamiliar with her, is a mystic healer and teacher. She works either through ceremony, retreats, or one-to-one with clients, and her focus really is to help more of us be truly and fully embodied, which means activating more of spirit whilst being hosted in this human flesh and form. Now, Naseem draws from mystical traditions, including much beloved Sufism to my heart, but also from yoga, shamanism, tantra, and natural indigenous cultures. Naseem, thank you. Thank you so much for being with us in these moments. I want to understand, in fact, let's begin with your own journey of how through learning through these amazing traditions did you come to do what you're doing?
Pleasure to be here, Tazeen. Thank you so much. I feel really honoured to share this time with you and everyone watching. Thank you. Yeah, this journey, it's sort of been many different pathways sort of threading themselves together in very obscure ways. And I think at the core of what we're speaking about in terms of that arrival home into feminine, into the grace of what, you know, our hearts are longing for, our bodies are longing for, I really had to kind of go off in many different directions. I needed to know the nature of my own abandonment, and on every level, you know. So my younger days were very hedonistic, for example. I lived a very different life prior to this, and I have no regrets because all of that brought me to, I think underneath all of this, there was a constant longing, a constant yearning. And I had a very visceral, intimate experience with the divine feminine at the age of 3 or 4, I think. And that I look back now through my own sort of capacity to see, and I see that instinct led me off in many different directions, and you could label them as wrong, but actually they were incredibly informative. And from that unfolding through kind of getting lost in the material and the hedonistic realms, it was almost like that journey needed to reach an end before the next pathway could unfold. And that pathway took me off into traveling, into a really deep spiritual quest to different lands, different cultures, different traditions, as you've mentioned. And each one of those traditions, at the seed of it all, was this devotion to know God. Like, you know, the yoga community I spent a lot of time with in Thailand and Mexico, I longed to see this face, you know, and there was almost this dissatisfaction in anything but. And there's a lot of kind of unfolding within my own dissatisfaction of that, but yet this yearning was the baseline. And I see that this insatiability, the constant longing is what has propelled me forward. And that has also propelled me forward into really embracing her, because to meet her is anything but easy. It's a initiation over and over again. And I think that foundation of that yearning, that insatiability, is what continues to propel me forward. So from all these different traditions, I started to see what was really missing in my own spiritual unfolding, and how, of course, like with everything that we are uncovering, there is a shade of the patriarchy that is influencing the choices that we make, and even our spiritual choices. And in seeing that, I then got to see the point where that was kind of the turning point, where I really was face to face with my own abandonment of this body, of this being, of this spirit. And that turning point was the initiation, the first initiation into her, into divine feminine, into this unfolding that we're now here to speak about.
You mentioned you had a visceral experience. Would you mind sharing a bit more about that?
When I was young, yeah, Yeah, I mean, you know, as many people do, I grew up in a really sort of challenging environment with a lot of relational dynamics that were incredibly uncomfortable, which has, of course, formed my own journey towards my own healing, and, you know, the layers of trauma that I've needed to embrace. And yet that was the home environment that I grew up in. And there was one point, I mean, I think many times my my strategy was to run to the bathroom and lock myself in the bathroom. And when I was very young, I grew up with my grandma. She was, you know, as we do in Asian families, you know, the grandparents descend, and it's wonderful. We grow up in this sort of bigger environment. And my grandmother, my mother's mother, she was there with us for periods when I was very young. And this must have informed me in some way that I have only understood as an adult. And one moment, one very devastating moment where I was just broken into tears, 3 or 4 years old, I went to the bathroom and I was just wailing, you know, wailing in the way that I know as an adult, you know, like really on my knees. And I was calling out to my grandmother. I was really calling out, like, where are you? Why have you abandoned me? Where are you? And as an adult, having revisited this moment, it was almost like I had no memory. I have a memory of it, but it didn't arrive. This memory didn't re-arrive until a very specific moment in a retreat where I was ready to face the abandonment that I felt from God. You know, we've spoken about this, that where are you? You know, where have you been? Where have you been? And I was taken back to this moment as a child, and I realized that that moment when I was calling out to my grandmother, I in my mind, she was the equivalent of God. That was my understanding at that age. And this was so interesting to understand in terms of my instinct in this lifetime has been to discover the nature of the feminine as divine, actually, you know, and the first part of my journey very much exploring the masculine nature of the divine, and that being the prerequisite, a very necessary prerequisite to knowing the face of her, and then seeing, you know, all the notions in which I make one better than the other, or and needing to then make the journey into union, these two faces coming into union. But yeah, that moment as a child was incredibly revelatory and connected to that devotion that has propelled me forward. Like I think I've been seeking that face my whole life, you know, seeking that remembering, that union, that coming together, the traversing through that barren land of separation has been my my work ground, has been the ashes upon which I've been growing, I guess.
I mean, divine feminine, just naming her in that way is, I remember when I first heard the term, I mean, this is the extent of patriarchy and a very masculine way that religion has formed, and this masculinization of a god, that it almost felt sacrilege to be even saying that God may be a woman, have feminine qualities, and yet through all the traditions, you know, through the mystic traditions of Christianity, through Kabbalahism in Judaism, and through Sufism in Islam, the honoring of her is there, but yet she's more hidden, so to speak. So what do you, like, when you start working with women, what are some of the overlaid projections, if you like, that you're meeting when they come to meet her within them?
Yeah, interesting. I mean, it's so nuanced in many ways, and yet, and this is, I mean, to really speak to what she is. She is a complete mystery. She's a complete mystery, as you described. She's hidden, and there's more to say on what she is. But for that reason, when people come towards her, I think there are, like I say, it's nuanced to all of us because we all have our own sort of transgenerational healing and trauma that we come in with our ancestry, our, you know, the lives that we've lived to bring us to this moment. So our trajectory is based on all of that. Yet there are patterns, there are very similar patterns. And essentially, as we've spoken about before, there is this huge, huge fear. There is simply a terror that is so deeply hidden in our system towards her, towards what she is. And part of that is our relation to the nature of her. I mean, I really want to say that she is a mystery. She is a mystery, and the way that I described her is based on the level of revelation she has offered me and the depth to which I've seen. So we're always describing her from that capacity of how deeply we have met her within ourselves. So based on that, so that's where my perception of her is coming from. And there is so much more of her to be discovered, and there are so many more shades of her that I am still discovering. But to speak to that meeting with her, she is entirely, to me, all inclusive. She is the entire cosmos. She is the entire, you know, the entirety of existence. And to be everything in that way, there is a need for I see it as she being the meeting of divine masculine, divine feminine to birth this big she, you could say. So she's revealed through union every time we meet ourselves deeply. There is a balancing of him and her within ourselves, and that gives way to gnosis, to wisdom, to her grace. Like the words that I really use to describe her these days are grace and wisdom. And, you know, wisdom is rooted in not knowing. Wisdom is different from knowledge and intellect. So knowledge being something that we can, you know, require, but wisdom is a revelation. And that wisdom is rooted in, we have to be honest that we don't know. There is a not knowing inside of that. So when people approach her, we come with a lot of arrogance, you know, we come with a lot of agenda of what the world has informed her of what she is. And to some degree, this is wonderful because, you know, it's almost like the carrots have to be dangled because she's so hidden and she's so mysterious and she's in fact incredibly dark. And if she is everything, just think about all those things in existence that we don't like. And yet that is her, that she has no objection to anything, you know. So as we're moving towards her, we are going to meet all of our own objections. We're going to touch all of our own trauma. We're going to unpack a world of discomfort and beauty and wonder. But at the same time, there is no preference for one or the other, pain or joy or, you know, laughter or anger. It's all there. So there is this innate, and it can be very unconscious for a long time in the beginning, but to acknowledge that we are afraid of that meeting because it's a descent. There's a dropping into the underworld really that's required to know her. And, you know, we think about the way that we move in the world and we're very comfortable remaining above ground, you know. And if we've come from the traditions that you and I have come from, we've come from those, you know, growing up in a Muslim community, coming from religious backgrounds, coming from like a strong religious spiritual ancestry, we are very, you know, and a part of the beauty of our ancestry and also the challenge is that we come from this history of transcendence, which is what a lot of religions are speaking to, or spiritual traditions are speaking to. And that's incredibly wonderful. But it's almost like we cannot keep, there's a point where transcendence becomes moving away from, whereas the transcendence from the ground, from the body, from the ground of ourselves, is an all-inclusive awakening. You know, so when she is included, when that descent, when we start to awaken into the depths, that's an entirely different journey. And it feels very different to the transcendent journey that we're used to. So yeah, there's a total kind of turnaround that happens that we don't necessarily want. You know, when we approach her, as I say, we have all these ideas and we have the fear and we have the arrogance and we have our own agenda. And, you know, these are all wonderful places where we meet our own shadows. And at the same time, the only way we can meet her, for me, the keys in meeting her are gentleness, absolute gentleness, you know, dropping a lot of those hard structures that have been there to protect us in the right way, but they are still hard structures. They are still walls. And, you know, the boundaries are very different, but these walls need gentleness because they have been protecting us from pain. So as we approach these walls, using the same mentality as we've, you know, used in other areas of our lives, pushing through, forcing, you know, that aggressive kind of masculine drive doesn't work. She disappears. We don't get to see her if we come with gentleness. It's almost like that flower that gets to blossom in its own time, you know. And the same quality in our humility and our reverence to her, in our capacity to not know, you know, to really come with, I don't know you, you are a mystery, but I'm here, and I'm willing to the degree that I am willing, and I'm going gently with myself in that willingness because I'm also scared. You know, all of these facets need to be held in kindness, held in that gentleness as we meet her.
Yeah, it's so interesting because, I mean, in Sufism, one thing I learned is, you know, about the qualities of God, the most used qualities recited and shared in the Quran being, you know, compassion and mercy, the Rahman, the Rahim, and this concept that we are literally swimming in the womb of the beloved. And certainly means something that, you know, because I've kind of studied personal development for like 20 years. And there's so much like modern psychology and self-help tools and techniques available out there. But it's only been in the last few years that this fixing outside, right? This kind of constant, I'm just going to manipulate and fix and change the outside. And then you're still left with the gaping hole inside. It's almost like this unsatiable, unquenchable thirst.
Yeah.
And it was literally through our dear teachers, Kabir and Camille Helminski, that this portal of a different realm and way of being in the body started to open. And then actually, you know, some sessions that you and I have had makes me also realize like the bypassing that goes on, right? Like that abandonment of the course child or wound, the rejected parts on anything that feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So you don't want to go there. You don't want to, it's almost like you come out of your own process in a way, because it's not looking and feeling how you're back into this mind-body construct where mind dominates.
Yeah.
And therefore you miss everything within, which is the only place that one needs to look for true, lasting, authentic transformation. You touched on the fact that we, you know, come from these South Asian heritage, and yes, there's so much we could unpick with this, because so much, even within the traditional form of Islam, takes us so away from any of what we're sharing and discussing in right now. Can you just share a little bit about the traumas for the South Asian women that, you know, what are some of the themes that you're witnessing that are emerging through this particular demographic?
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah. With transgenerational trauma and ancestral healing, it's, I think, the foundation of being able to understand that, and this is very much where Sufism is such a blessing, this foundation to understand the nature of that is to know that we are interconnected. We are all one at one level, right? So, you know, we know the timelines of our own family line that we are living through in this lifetime, but to bear in mind that there are so many family lines, I call them kind of fractal lines, ancestral lines, that we are coming from. So, you know, Asian women who are growing up in the UK, there is, you know, the land also, the lands that we live on are also showing us more about our ancestry, our kind of our spirit history, you could say, other lives that we've lived. So there is this whole kind of cosmic map of you know, various timelines. But we have come into this life as South Asian women, and in many ways, you know, there are again very general categories in which we can kind of speak to the themes of trauma that come through our ancestry, very similar, and yet based on who we are in this lifetime, there are nuances. And the way to kind of explore that is, you know, on one hand, is to look at the history of the lands that we've come from, to look at the stories that, you know, our parents, our grandparents, etc., have lived through. But I can say that this wasn't actually my journey as much as I was informed, you know, growing up. Of course, I heard my parents' stories and what's happened, but it was in fact my body, it was my womb that showed me particular patterning that runs through my ancestral line. And, you know, we can speak about how this can happen. But there are specific themes. So if we look at, you know, if we look at the dynamics of where we've come from, and we look at the history of the power dynamics between men and women in the lands that we've come from, it kind of shows us the nature of as you've been speaking about so beautifully, like the connection that we have to spirituality from that masculine paradigm, and how hidden that feminine paradigm is. And these traditions, they speak so deeply of, you know, reverence towards the feminine, yet that is not what we have seen and what our ancestors have experienced, actually. And this is then filtered out into how men and women are relating to one another. And so, for example, you know, in our history, there has been war, there has been migration, there has been colonization, and these themes create different fractals or fragments of our within our own trauma, within our healing journey. So, for example, we might have memories of, I certainly did, of rape, for example, whereas a woman from the West may have a memory of, you know, the time from the witch hunts of being strangled or burned, you know, and we might also have these because, of course, we have lived many different lives in many different cultures, I believe. But the keys lie in, you know, the context of who we are in this lifetime. So the forms of trauma that can arise are it's interesting to explore the dynamics of power within men and women. And you'll notice that from our culture, there is, you know, our husbands, the men are in charge in that sense. There is a kind of particular dynamic around authority, and that goes across the board. So authority in terms of where we place that authority, where are we deeply listening? And for example, this is just one example, but I was talking with a friend about this recently about, you know, I come from a family filled with doctors, you know, and the times that we're living in, and the questions that we have to ask ourselves of, like, what decisions do we make around these bodies, bearing in mind that these bodies are where all of this gnosis, all of this wisdom is actually revealed. So we can read and we can explore, but this is where we find everything that we are searching for, in fact. So that includes our trauma, that includes the empowerments and the wisdom, and that includes our ancestral threads as well. So when I was speaking about this whole notion of, you know, I grew up around a lot of doctors, and then at some point I just rebelled. I rebelled against the whole medical system. You know, and it's absolutely not to say that there is so much. We've been so blessed with this capacity that has developed through science, you know, so blessed. And this has been one of the incredible blessings of patriarchy. We wouldn't have this if it wasn't for patriarchy. Yet for me, I was seeing in my own family line how doctors are kind of treated like gods. You know, when something happens in the body, in my family, we don't inquire as to what's there emotionally, what's going on, what's happening in our lives that's impacting us. We go to the doctors and we trust in what they tell us. And there is nothing wrong with that on one hand. But when that becomes the primary and we don't ever inquire within ourselves, you can see the power dynamic there. You know, and again, wherever there is a power dynamic, there is always a suppressed, a victim, and there is an oppressor. You know, an abuser or an oppressor, to whichever way you want to label it. And we have a tendency to one or the other, and we can have both as well. And what I see in our community is there are particular forms of victim states. Certainly I have had to work through them, and then with the women that I work with, this has been really primary. And there are different ways to move with that. And again, nothing wrong. It's just one of the fractal lines that exists within our culture. And yeah, there's so much. There's so much.
There is. There's almost too much to unpick actually in this. You know, the fact that we're touching on it perhaps is enough for now. It's just, you know, that's such a key one. Like, I really resonate with the victim script. You know, she's been a very present friend through through life, and it's interesting because it almost has given me permission to not take responsibility.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of this kind of misdirected feminine empowerment, but it's almost like the overcompensation of the victim story, whereby it's like, look at me, look what I went through. And it's almost like, well, where were you when it came to making that decision of marrying the jerk in the first place? Do you know what I mean? Or whatever it is. It's like the abandonment, and it obviously everything's happening at this very subconscious layer, right? I could call it like moving with the iceberg. We only ever experience the tip of, sometimes most of us only ever experience our own tip of the iceberg, as well as the other person's, whereas beneath the surface is where everything's happening. But I wanted to just come back to something about, you know, the way that Asian women have coped, if you like, in patriarchy, and the forms of manipulation, and maybe the more darker side of the feminine comes into play, which is an equal overcompensation of the power paradigm and patriarchy, and perhaps as wounding to a certain extent as patriarchy itself. So can you just share more about the darker aspects of the feminine and how she plays out?
Yeah, so you know, you've named it well. In that specific environment of the victim, there is so much manipulation. There is so much, we manipulate so much because we're not in control. We are in a codependent way of living, right? So from that codependent place, we become very clever and very snidey and able to manipulate existence. And this is the thing, because the whole scope of it is based on the imbalance of power, where we have misunderstood power. We've inherited an understanding of power through the masculine patriarchal paradigm, which is one facet. But that the true nature of the power of creation is that which we are fearing, is that the divine feminine, essentially, that it is remaining a mystery. You know, so naturally the human mind that has been, you know, we're, you know, bless us, we've inherited so much. So that human mind only knows how to sort of connect to power through these forms of manipulating. And, you know, from the other perspective, the dominant person, it's a control archetype, you know, so remaining in that superior position. And this is where we have these distortions of power all over the planet, in our governments, in our relationships, and with our parents, you know, everywhere. And we have to kind of, you know, as you say, like step back and observe this. Like the dark feminine, she is really the biggest challenge with her. I mean, she's everything that we don't want to look at, essentially. You know, she's, you know, even look at the deities. You know, there's this story of how everyone fears Kali because she looks so scary and ugly, you know, and these are not things that we don't want to be ugly, for one, do we? We have such an attachment to our own physical form, and we certainly don't want to go towards anything that is scary. And this is where we're kind of missing the point, because these are beliefs that we are carrying. These are the misunderstandings that we are carrying. And this is what the dark feminine is inviting, or very strongly inviting sometimes. You know, we see her in her, she's, you know, at the root of the feminine has, you know, the reason why nature is such an incredible teacher when it comes to her wisdom is because nature demonstrates the cycles of life, and nature has no problem with the whole cycle of death and birth, death and birth. But we have a great amount of discomfort around the nuances in that circle, you know, and meeting death, meeting the void, meeting the letting go, and allowing the compost of that surrender to be the form of what, you know, the foundation of where birth can take place. This is hard for us, and it's ongoingly hard. The deeper we go, the deeper this wisdom we carry into ourselves. So, you know, there's sort of surface wounding, and we go deeper and we go deeper, and these death cycles, they continue. And honestly, at times they can still be hard, no matter where we are in that spectrum. And so this is what the feminine is showing us. She is showing us that there is this fear of death. There is the fear of survival. This is another big one in most ancestral lines, but it's very particular in our ancestral line, for example, having come, you know, we've had to migrate, we're forced out of our homelands, etc. And, you know, all the kind of the different stages of abandonment that have happened from that homeland. So there is, a fear of survival that comes in from various angles, but that's connected to our story. So essentially, dark feminine, she's inviting us to get to know death. Kali, you know, whatever feminine archetype that we relate to, there is one in every tradition. There is a feminine archetype in every tradition that symbolizes death, that symbolizes that what we perceive to be ugly and fearful, because that is a mystical doorway that we are constantly being invited into. And there is power. This is where we rebalance that structure of power, because when we start to walk towards gently, you know, very kindly and gently towards that which we're afraid of, we are changing these dynamics, these power dynamics. We are changing the tilt that's happening there, because we're no longer playing that game. It's a game. You know, the victim abuser, I mean, first of all, you can, from one angle, it's absolutely not a game. It's heartbreaking. It's devastating what's happening to us and what's happening to people of color and women, and, you know, the animals, like every form of existence that's experiencing violation deserves our compassion. And at the same time, there is as we enter into contact with that sadness or rage, or however it manifests, that's our doorway towards something that we've been terrified of, and that's us walking closer to her. And as we take those steps towards her, she reveals herself. You know, that's where our humility comes in. That's where our gentleness is required. She's not showing up unless we're willing to take those steps, actually. So dark feminine, I mean, there's just so much to say. She is, you know, she is our trauma. She is the anger that we've suppressed for lifetimes. She's the rage that we feel about what's happening on this planet. She is the tsunamis and the fires in the Amazon. She is everything that really ugly is a good word to use, because that triggers something in us, you know. And our relationship, you know, really starting with the physical form. How comfortable are we in these physical bodies? What are these labels that we have on ourselves? You know, ugly, incompetent, fat, overweight, underweight, big this, small that, whatever, you know, like all of these distortions that we carry physically can also be doorways into the dark nature of the feminine. And as you say, she's incredibly hidden, because these places are not pretty. You know, they are deep.
Exactly. And I was just curious about anger, because I think it's often like the emotions that we don't like or that we judge. So you kind of got that play, haven't you? You got the emotion, and then there's a judgment of having the emotion. And then it's like, well, how do you still turn up relationally, hold the emotion? Because, you know, life at the moment is on steroids. You know, it's kind of everything is this constant connectivity, this like intensity. So having that level of awareness to be able to hold your anger and yet not act from it, like the story of Ali on the battlefield, right? The Hazrat Ali was on the battlefield, and you know, there was a war being waged against Islam, and he was sort of there with his sword, and he was about to kill someone, but the guy spat in his face. And you know, the story goes on to share that Hazrat Ali then lowered his sword, and the guy was like, what? Why aren't you going to kill me? You've got your opportunity. And Hazrat Ali says, before I was going to kill you in the name of God. Now if I kill you, I'm killing you out of my anger. So that level of maturity, that state of, you know, the saints and the great ones, is very interesting to be with, particularly when I remember with one of our sessions, home, as you've described her, feels very alien. The majority of our lives, not even knowing our primordial place of home. And yeah, of course, we all fear death, and it's just, you know, but every day I was having a conversation with a friend and we almost laughed because there was this moment and she looked at her animals. She's got a chicken and a dog and cats, and she was like, I just remember it's taken, you know, 25 billion years to get to this point. They're doing all right. I'm all right. And then sort of Mum and I went on to say that we're all worm food. We're all worm fodder anyway. But that place of home is not familiar to many. I just want to touch on one of the, so in Threshold in the Sufi tradition, an offering from Kabir and Camille Harminsky for the month of April is this hadith of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, which is, none of you has faith until you love for your brother or sister what you love for yourself. And when I actually sat with that, there were so many emotions. And one of the things that kind of came through was identifying some real deep, dark jealousies and envies, which I notice is quite dominant as well with some of the feminine energies. But what can you share, you know, what comes to you with that theme? And if you could talk a little bit more, Naseem, about this sort of darker side of the envy and jealousies that might be connected to the feminine.
Yeah. Could you repeat the quote again?
Yes, of course. So
thank you.
Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was said to have said, none of you has faith until you love for your brother or sister what you love for yourself.
Beautiful. Yeah. So it's speaking to there's different angles. There's a voice of compassion that's coming through there, right? And I'm sensing. Tell me a little bit more about where the jealousy arises for you, in terms of, does it feel like a bypassing to do that?
It feels like to really let it all wash away, so that you can love for the other what you would love for yourself. In my sort of reflection of it, was also meeting all the grudges that I'm holding, right? Because
Yes.
if I can, if I feel like I've been wronged, not to say I have been, but in my story of what interplays or passes, I hold a grudge or resentment, it's much more difficult to then love for that person what I would for myself. It's like, stupid cow, she doesn't deserve that. She said this to me back in 2010. Do you know what I mean? This kind of, so in that level, it does feel like a bypass. Oh yeah, I love for my brother what I love for myself. And it's more of like, well, hold on a minute. Before I can do that, let me look at all the blocks and all the sort of things that I'm still holding. Because I was kind of extending it more to like someone who you love and can naturally offer that too, but just someone who you're more in an emotional struggle with.
Yeah. Which is where the faith comes in, right? The challenge of that's where it comes in, and it's really beautifully expressed from that very higher level. And the time that we're in, like this, simply the time that we're in, this era, this time of healing and embodiment that we're in, that, we haven't necessarily been in hundreds of years ago. There was when Prophet was around, it was a different time of unfolding, and yet that quote is as relevant today, but maybe from a slightly different angle, because as you say there, or as you're pointing to, there is that our capacity to love another comes from our capacity to love ourselves. So as deeply as we have entered into this terrain of holding, as you say, holding that aggression or holding the jealousy, and this is where masculine and feminine are both coming into union, because that holding, where it becomes blame and projection, we're not holding. There is, like you spoke beautifully about, the sense of home and the maturity and the responsibility, the ability to respond that is required in that maturity. And the pathways into embodiment, as I see it, of course, the body and its portals, but it's a emotional maturity that grows. It's an emotional body, the emotional body that gets to purify and empty itself out, because love and the feminine and truth and grace have no space as long as there is all of our kind of nuances are there's nothing wrong with our inherited trauma and our pain and our discomfort and our jealousy and our envy. Yet these are the places that need to become free and spacious in order for that love to enter. And as that love enters, then there's the possibility from that well, because love has no limitations. Love just flows. And the thing is, again, this is another way that we tend to manipulate. So when we are in a place of conflict like that, and our beloved prophets and the saints came in with a different capacity. They came in with a different outset in terms of their capacity to love. And this is by no means to say that anyone is better. We have the same opportunity to grow in that way. But the key in that relational dynamic is when we are triggered to fake forgiveness and fake love, none of that is real. What is required in that moment is love and holding of that trigger, of that judgment of ourselves, of that pain, of that, anger, whatever it may be. And that action of holding and kindness and ownership is the love. It is choosing love not only for yourself, but for the other. That's the most loving thing to do for the other also. Do you see what I mean? Like when we are loving ourselves.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And it also kind of brings up this element of trust.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of almost trusting in the perfection of that trigger.
Yeah.
And so the more familiar, I guess, we are with home, the more able we become in being able to potentially hold the triggers.
Yeah, exactly. The triggers are the doorway. They are the portal, and they are related. You relate to them emotionally and both physically within the body. And if we are willing to enter that doorway, that's us approaching the feminine. That's us coming with humility and reverence to that space and being there very tenderly, because we can't force that door to open. We can't. We simply have to recognize that there's the door of anger, of jealousy, whatever it is, and be there, present. And then, avoid or, find all of our tendencies that protect us. But gradually we are more and more present. And then that door opens, and there is a flooding of love and freedom. And from that flood, that well overflows. And then we can be in actual loving connection with the other. So this is one of the very specific teachings within intimate relating, for example. This is one of the core containers for where we learn how, with any relationship, to be honest, but in intimate relationship, we really drop our guard. We are willing to kind of open our hearts enough to see all of our barriers around that heart, So then we get met with that moment where the partner has triggered us and we want to blame them. But that's not loving. So when you own that vibration that's arising, that when you enter towards that door, that is the choice of love for you, which results in them being loved in that moment, because it's the kind of thing to do for both. And when you're moving in real commitment with another human being, friend, partner, parent, when you're committed to love, that means choosing what is loving for everyone. And that starts with yourself. And as you make that choice, the other option is them being on the end of projection, on the end of your aggression, and that's not loving. And that's what builds a dynamic of trust in our relationships. And then coming back to that quote, all the way around back to that beautiful quote, faith. The word is faith that he's putting forward. Faith comes from this capacity to love. And I've really been exploring this word. We've just had Easter, and this whole mythological story of Christ and resurrection has been so present with me. And Jesus, his stories are very much depicting this incredible level of compassion that he was willing to sacrifice everything for. He did, and the rebirth that came through that. Yet his teachings with his disciples were very grounded. If you have a family, go take care of your family, take care of your business, showing them how to prioritize that level of care for self is what's kinder for the whole, what's kinder for everyone. And from that care can overflow, love can overflow. And the word faith is very much rooted in not knowing. Faith is not something linear or logical. Faith is beyond reason. So to love that widely and deeply, there's no logic in it. It seems more logical to kind of fake forgiveness and be kind and not deal with your envy and your judgment, right? That's the linear structure that you bring.
And it just comes later and bites you in the arse. So in my experience, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to deal with that. That's not me. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, here it is again. And it's really beautiful actually what you share, because there's an e-course that I'm involved in at the moment by Kabir Helminski called Journey of a Seeker. And actually what you were describing, the more familiar we all become with that home within, it's kind of introducing God as the third. So even in an intimate relationship, otherwise it's just ego meeting ego. But if you're both sort of committed to whatever you want to call it, home, divine, God, then there's an understanding that, well, I'm in that agape love. I'm in relationship to that. That's the most important. You're in relationship to that. And then the compassion can flow, because there's a natural understanding. Oh, well, obviously they're behaving like that given where they are in relationship with their rubbiter, right? But this, it all sounds very simple. And yeah, in the day-to-days, it's taken the best part of decades, without, naming the number of decades, that I'm still dealing with this anger energy, like my own suppressed rage, that actually is a karmic contract I've come to reside over. But I would love you to share with our viewers something you shared with me before about what's the, what anger and rage have to offer.
Yeah, beautiful. I'm actually doing a workshop on this in the next month, so it's very alive for me too. Yes, another one of our generational threads for women like us, and it's not just us at all, but there is so anger arises in it's either suppressed or it's exalted, and when it's suppressed, it manifests as often as disease and illness and depression, and denial. There's a huge denial, which is a suppression of power, because this is the gift of anger. It's connecting us to the power of creation. It's bringing us into healthy boundaries on an individual level so that we can interact with the divine in a healthy way, like to decipher that relationship in a healthy way. And, certainly for me, and I know many women from our culture, we tend to be very wide open. We tend to, and boundary-less, the boundaries, because of suppressed anger, we don't have that kind of healthy relating capacity with the boundaries. And the exalted way is what we often experience on the outside, if we're wired in that way, or often within ourselves, is aggression. And that aggression is then sort of channeled into abuse or violence or, words or whatever it may be. So again, this is where, because it's such an intense force, anger is such an intense force, and this is how we can know, and certainly not even know, my own personal experience has been the strong intimacy that is revealed through embracing these various shades of anger, the intimacy that's revealed with the feminine, with the power of creation, with nature. It's almost like a bursting of grace that comes through when anger is held, when it's held. So when we are not suppressing and when we're not exalted, then holding that force. And this is not something that we can do overnight. It's almost like it can be so suppressed, for example, that it's the amount of lids on top of that kind of have to burst one by one before we get access to the full intensity of that. And that's a good thing, because if we were to get access to the full intensity of it without clearing the space, it would floor us, it would overwhelm us, and it already does overwhelm us, So again, that gentleness and that humility towards it, whether it is exalted or whether it is suppressed, and growing. It's almost like how I experience the entry into any of these deep, dark places is a kind of the holding of the masculine, which is our choice, which is our willingness to be present, comes in. And he is the love, and then he meets with that dark place inside of ourselves. So, and then we find out what our capacity is there. Are we able to stay? Do we find a protection wall there? Do we find a defense mechanism there? Are we in avoidance? Are we manipulating? The nuances, as you know, are endless as we walk towards that. But as we meet one by one by one, we're there. We're more and more present. And as we become so present with that, it then becomes rage in a way. She shows the beauty of that it's almost like an eruption, like a volcano can erupt, but safely, because your body and your presence is able to hold the overflow of passion and wildness and grace and innate grounded earthly power that comes through, because you have shown yourself to be trustworthy. And so this is why it's a bit by bit journey. And in that bit by bit journey, you will meet different flavors of anger. There'll be frustration and there'll be hatred. This is a really deep one. Hatred is another part of that dark feminine that we just don't want to own. I don't have hatred in me. No. I'm religious. I'm spiritual. Major blind spot. Major blind spot. And what else? We have aggression. We have, sacred rage that I speak about, which is sacred rage is something that is revealed through this capacity to hold when we become really deeply trustworthy. So anger is a piece of work, and we don't like it because, when something arises in that moment of being triggered, it is very overwhelming for the system. But I always speak about, many of the people I work with know that I speak about this. Like, I'm going to give you a little demonstration. The overwhelm is almost like it's a stretching. When we are overwhelmed, there's a need to listen in. Like, in some moments it needs care, it needs gentleness. And as we're caring and as we're gentleness, we'll find that that overwhelm is actually stretching our nervous system. And it feels like a stretch. And so we move away from that stretch, and we go into our addictive tendencies, the phone or eating or sex or whatever we go into, or smoking or whatever, because it's uncomfortable. But there is a blessing in that overwhelm. There's a growing, a stretching of your nervous system, which is the capacity to hold that intensity of power. And sometimes when we can relax that much, the anger, it's almost like that learning coincides with how deeply we can experience anger and grief as well. They're kind of working alongside each other. So both go deeper and deeper. And as our capacity grows, the extent to which we can grieve more efficiently and experience anger more efficiently, minus the kind of the chaos, you could say, minus the kind of panic and the worry and the projection and the blaming, the more we can experience, and the more our systems get to be cleansed through those, the fire and the water. Essentially, they cleanse our system, and that is what's making space for the turning, the empowerment of anger, the sacred rage, the healthy boundaries, the true power of the feminine that gets a voice, that can finally express that through such integrity. Not through, because we have a tendency to respond to violence with more violence, and aggression with more aggression, and abuse with more abuse. This is, because we're engaged in the fight. But when this is happening, this is a union. This is a willingness to meet beyond the fight, and this is a wonderful way to explore the balancing of masculine and feminine within ourselves, looking in our lives to see where is conflict, because that place of conflict is reflecting where there is inner conflict within you. And to pretend that you don't have conflict within you is, I mean, it's dangerous.
To say you're not human, actually. To say you haven't got conflict is maybe like the ultimate bypass in a way. The ultimate sort of denial of your humanness. Oh my God, I just felt like as you were speaking, I was like, I could do a PhD on hatred and anger. And it kind of brings me to my third point, actually, because I want you to share about the alignment with womb, heart, mind. And I just want to kind of, why I said I could write a PhD on it is because I had severe trauma to my womb when I had a placenta abrupture. So I was on in the Maldives with a 6-month pregnancy, and the womb just went into an abrupture, which is just the placenta moves away and you go into spontaneous childbirth. And so, I sort of, in my situation, gave birth. It was a 5-day labor, then buried my child after she passed away 10 hours later. And obviously now, almost 20 years later, it's been 18 years actually this year, I can see, it just spiraled me into this very deep trauma and suppressed rage, which actually then played out in my body for many years after. And it hasn't been until I've met yourself and a really amazing sort of therapists, and I've been working with them, where they've held the space for me to open up to the anger in safety, that the pain also started shifting. And so, I'm not alone, I know, in this experience. But the womb energy is one that I've never really connected with up until the last year. And again, it's like a real awareness that's now come through of just how masculinized our wombs are. I've done interviews with Chidiogo and also Dr. Ghazala Aziz Scott, who, you know, both of them open up to how women, we haven't looked after our bodies. We've been given so much and taken so much through this kind of masculine band-aid culture that we're part of. So just tell me more, Naseem, like, share your words about this mind, spirit, you know, heart and womb connection and why it is so important.
Yeah, yeah. I'll start with the womb and the belly. And for men, the hara. So they, you know, in the sense we have the womb and they have the hara. And essentially, we have no idea how blessed we are with this gateway of the womb. I mean, it is the doorway to all of existence, to everything that we are speaking about. It's a physical portal where, as I experience it, spirit can step in and out of matter. You know, so within that realm, we are able to experience the full extent of our humanness and at the same time get profound access. You know, we talked about the transcendence, but that transcendence from the ground is an entirely different experience. It's an embodied experience of the spirit realms, of the heavenly realms, of, you know, the subtle realms of the elementals and many things. There's, you know, the ancestral realms. We get a lot of non-physical access there too, as well as physical. And, you know, I teach a lot about the various portals in the womb, for example, the physical portals of ovaries, clitoris, G-spot, cervix, etc. There's 8 in total. And each one being it's kind of like an archetype, a physical map with these 8 archetypes. And each one has an empowerment and a shadow. And it is literally just a map on one level. Yet for me, it was how this journey unfolded for me. Like each of these physical portals had a message and a gift for me and a huge challenge at the same time. And this is how the understanding of this ancient wisdom, I mean, you know, the wisdom prior to religions, we had these traditions of priestesses and temples, and there, you know, that lineage is also in every single one of us. It's in our bones. So there's a knowing of something. There's a knowing, and yet the doorway, as we've been discussing, is consistently through discomfort. It's consistently through pain. And our relationship to discomfort and pain is what gets to grow through that experience of overwhelm, you know. And I really do not know one single woman on this journey, man too, who has not experienced physical phenomena in their body, but especially in the belly, in that region of the belly. And so it becomes really important to address, and we go all the way back to the whole doctor thing that we spoke about, but it becomes really important to address our relationship to physical pain. And, you know, this is a really hard one, because to us, pain is a problem. It's something to fix. It's an issue. Illness is an issue.
It's hardwired. It's like, it's so hardwired that it's, as you say, it's a problem. It shouldn't be there. It's, you know, we deny pain. We want to deny it all the time.
Yeah. And yet when you can bring that reverence, that devotion to something that is so uncomfortable, and, you know, if we really look at the masters of our time right now, the ones that are alive, I don't know one single one that hasn't gone through serious illness, actually. Like, I know I can feel you, like, reconciling over this. And it's really inspiring, very inspiring to see how these beings relate to their bodies. And this is wisdom that we can take on. Yet it is ongoingly hard, you know. Okay, so then I have this problem, and I can surrender through this, and then something bigger comes along, and And there is this kind of belief of like, why me? The victim starts to arise and all of this stuff comes up, you know. But when we can really bring reverence and the not knowing to that doorway, and gentleness, this is this is how the feminine shows herself to us. We have to be kind and gentle, and that is what pain is essentially teaching us. Pain is slowing down those distorted forms of masculine that go in the world, that achieve and want to be goal orientated, and you know, to have success as measurable. The feminine is completely immeasurable. You know, the depth of her. There are so many beings on this planet carrying her wisdom, carrying her keys, that we will never see, because they're not standing on the rooftop shouting about it. You know, it is mystical, it's hidden, it's mysterious, and there's a reason for that. And this is where our reverence comes in. This is where our gentleness comes in. And this is where what is required, even in our lovemaking, the entire form of lovemaking has to change as well. The way we are intimate physically, that gentleness and that kindness can enter into our sexual organs, into the body space. And so this is just kind of, you know, one layer of what we meet there, but it's a very common layer that continues. So, you know, for example, as we're deepening into the womb, we have digestive issues. You know, that doorway is all the kind of you know, all the mainstream words for whatever happens in our gut. You know, we're all taking better care of our gut these days and adjusting our diet, and this is wonderful. This is what we're being asked to listen to, that inner authority of what is it my body needs. And what if I drop every instruction that's given to me and just listen to that and trust that and hear that, and to know that truth arises moment by moment. So the truth of what you need to eat now, what I need to eat now, may change in a year once something is healed. You know, the way that we need to take care of our womb, that will change. And so yeah, it feels important to address our relationship to pain and illness, etc. And speaking about these three centers, what I have found, like for me personally in my journey, we all come in with ways in which we are strongly wired. So we either come in with a strong access to the emptiness, to the void, a strong access to the heart, to that deep masculine love, or a strong access to the earth, to the ground. And then we have to kind of navigate those distortions that arise in that access. That was very much what I was doing before this descent. I was, you know, my spiritual journey, my yoga journey, my tantric journey was very much rooted in purification of the heart, like opening that space of the heart. And that was my easy doorway. And I got a lot of access to a lot of pain there and a lot of beauty. And of course, with that, how I've experienced it is that purification happens on a holistic level. So when something at the heart purifies, it rotates into other spheres that are connected and open too. So, you know, then as we deepen into that masculine love, that universal love, the mind gets to taste that, the headspace gets to taste that. And it's the same with the belly and the womb work, that as this begins to awaken, there is like a holistic opening, like a sphere that encapsulates the headspace and the heart. And it's almost like the wisdom of each expands into each dimension, you know. So for me, I had my gift in journeying into the womb is I had this strength of heart. I had a capacity to love, you know. So that capacity to love was then needed in the depths, in the trauma, in the ancestral trauma. And some have a great emptiness of the mind, which means that they have this capacity to sort of detach very well. So as you enter into the individuation of the belly work, there is so much story. There is so much of like me, my, and this, and that detachment is such a blessing, because it means a kind of greater openness around the pain. So the stories get to kind of dissolve quicker. And so there is skill on each level, and there is distortion on each level. And each one, I found that as one is purifying, sometimes it can be a focus, you know, on one area, but it inevitably benefits each of the other dimensions. And this is the time we're in, where the entire human being is being called forth, you know. So it's not just about the heart, it's not just about the head, it's not just about the belly either, whereas the belly might be more of where we're the part that we've abandoned for so long. So that's where a great deal of embodiment focuses. Yet at some point that tilting into you know, where we often get stuck in that embodiment work is where we do not embrace our fear of death, where we do not embrace the notion of detachment. And this, I don't often share this, but for me, the key that came very much later in healing trauma, is the disidentification, is the detachment, is the recognition of that I am not this body, actually. And that was terrifying for me, having so much identity with this physical form. I'm, you know, that's the way this woman is wired. And when I stepped into that terrain, I mean, it was death and death. It was, you know, meeting death, but it was this glorious, vast silence that came through that I was so terrified of, and continue to meet in many ways. But it was this space that somehow allows the resolution of trauma to really turn in on itself. You know, it's almost like the final threads of like, this actually doesn't exist, you know. And when you've healed something, it, you know, when you go to that extent of healing, we all have the power to transmute to that level. You know, we hear people say, oh, you know, I had this trauma and it might be like this for the rest of my life. Maybe, but it doesn't have to be. Actually, we have that power. We do.
It's so funny because as you're sharing, it reminds me again of something Sheikh Kabir says in the context of wrongdoing, but we could always put story into it. It's almost like, you know, when we have these stories of trauma, whatever they are, wounds, etc., etc., and we're trying to, again, with the mind, get rid of them, it never works. You know, when you've got ego constructs or story constructs or mind constructs, and you're dealing with them through mind or ego, you're only ever left with more ego or more mind. And eventually, from what you've narrated and shared, it leaves you. So the trauma story left you. It wasn't that you abandoned it, but the space that home that you're constantly focused on becomes so all encompassing that it just left you. And I'm going to just share, actually, if I may, Naseem, a really beautiful Sufi quote from Mevlana Jalaluddin Rumi. It says, "The spiritual path wrecks the body and afterwards restores it to health. It destroys the house to unearth the treasure, and with that treasure builds it better than before." Amira, if you're watching, thank you so much for sending me that many years ago on a Sufi retreat. It just felt very relevant to share after what you were sharing.
Yeah. Kind of sums it all up so beautifully, doesn't it? Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you again, Naseem. I could spend another hour with you easily. And maybe, you know, we'll invite you back on for some more sharings.
Wonderful.
So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tazeen. This has been such a joy. So rich. Many thanks. And thank you for watching if you're out there.
Yay, thank you. And all of Naseem's details you can find on the blog page. So do have a look and maybe attend one of her ceremonies or group retreats if you feel so inclined. Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me on Tazeen TV. Now, as a transformational life coach, I help and support those who might be feeling stuck or who just want to connect deeper to their sense of self and purpose. So maybe have a look at some of our offerings, and why not join me on one of our free workshops to begin that journey of aligning and optimizing your life. Now, for those wishing to better their telepresence, you can find out more about our media training offerings. Again, have a look at the website, and I look forward to continuing journeying with you soon.